Hey, this is David Wolinsky, back with another interview from the audio archives of No, Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the first half of my Q&A with Jay Margalus, who's a game developer, designer, and academic based in Illinois. He and I spoke on September 10th, 2015, and just a quick reminder, if you like these interviews I've been doing, you can always hop on over to nodon'tdie.com, where you'll see transcripts from the last few years. And you'll also see a link to my Patreon, where your support helps me continue this independent reporting, exploring, and interviewing that I've been doing, trying to make sense of game culture in the game industry. Thanks for listening, and now, here's Jay Margalus.
Okay. Jason Margalus. It's Jason with a Y because my dad's name was Jay. Did you know that? I don't know if I told you that.
Yeah, I did know that, yeah.
Special. Anyways, I'm 31. I am a designer, a game developer, and a teacher occasionally. I've made several games. Some games have won me recognition. I don't know. I have many leather-bound books, and I sometimes like to light my penis on fire.
Okay. I'll just remind you, we can take anything out of this transcript later if you choose to. Otherwise, I will transcribe everything verbatim and.
Perfect.
So you're saying you have many leather-bound books. It's just going to take 3 hours.
I know.
You're what's the joke?
Ask me about my hamburger recipes.
All right. Well, no, are you kind of joking about books because, one of the things you wanted to talk about was, why don't people who make games read more?
I said that because it sounded really pretentious when I said I've made games that have won awards and recognition.
Is that true though?
Yeah.
Have your games won?
Yeah.
So why are you making fun of it?
Because it just sounds like a jerky thing to say. I'm in a real weird space right now where I'll say things and Sarah will be like, should I say Sarah or my wife? You know synonymously.
I know who. People I think can figure out who Sarah is.
And so Sarah will be like, "That was awfully pretentious of you," and then I'll think to myself, "Oh no, that was pretty pretentious of me." And so I'm trying to become more cognizant of saying really cocky things all of the time.
Well, I run across that a lot, people who make games where they sort of feel a little uncomfortable, saying people care about the stuff that they do. So I wasn't sure if it was a thing like that. What sort of recognition? I ask this partly too for people reading this who don't know who you are or know I know you.
Yeah, I've been so a lot of the stuff I've been working on lately is exploring physical games, right? So hardware hacking and the intersection between that and I don't say video games, I'd say computer games. There's a connotation that comes along with video games and what they are, and computer games are a little bit more open. Anyway, so I've been getting recognition and winning. I won a couple of things from different hacker outlets for some of the game stuff I've been working on, like my custom controller set that I worked on was pretty popular, for instance.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, so what are the connotations of the word video game?
A common interface that everybody understands would be a controller hooked up to a console that's hooked up to a television. Mm-hmm. And a computer game is something that utilizes a computer in its aim of achieving the game's end. But it doesn't have to be a controller hooked up to a console, hooked up to a television. It could be an augmented reality game that uses only a limited amount of those things. Or I'm working on this really giant, weird Simon game now where you have to grab people to make lights go off and stuff. And it's nothing like a video game. It's a computer game, right? So there's just different connotations that, in my mind at least, these things carry.
Yeah. I mean, why do you think like video games, like the perception of what they are, even like they continue to sort of remain to be, like why is it so narrow that like? I mean, I guess we could be hopping around a little bit later, but you had said that like you didn't think that people realize how much the art they create is controlled by the canvas. Like you said, a standard controller hooked up to a console, it's tied into a display. These are things that are dictated by three companies, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. Yeah. But was it always that way though on video games?
I should probably read up even more before I make any sweeping claims on that. I imagine it's been that way for at least the last 20 or 25 years, which covers most of our awareness of video games. I'm sure there's some historian out there who, when they listen or read this thing, they'll the glasses will go up a little further and excuse me, that was not always the case. But yeah, I shouldn't hedge it. It's pretty. I mean, as far as our awareness is concerned, yes, it's always been the case.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like back in the 8-bit days, like you would at least see. I mean, but they would still be like the same controller, just they would look a little different, or there would be a thing like, oh my God, there's a turbo button. Mm-hmm. But I know that like, I know this is kind of your thing, as it was, I think as it was starting to be a couple of years ago where, you got really into like the, Raspberry Pi stuff and the Arduino stuff. I think, didn't you also make like something involving sand? Oh yeah, I have. That's I'm in a fantasy football league with some other game developers from Chicago. And one of them works at, I don't know if you ever met Bryce, but Bryce works at, or he used to work, I don't know what his affiliation is anymore, with the Museum of Science and Industry. Mm-hmm. And he had mentioned that they were going to try to build this augmented reality sandbox. Essentially, like when you play with the sand, it dynamically, a topography that's projected on top of the sand dynamically changes to match the height of the sand or the depth of the sand. And he'd mentioned that they were working on something like that. And so I decided to build one, and I got mine finished before the Museum of Science and Industry, so fuck them. No, just now some glasses are going to go up.
Yeah, right. There's a guy twisting his mustache somewhere in the bowels of the Museum of Science and Industry. Mm-hmm. That motherfucker.
Yeah, he just dropped his piece of dry ice or whatever.
There's it's in like the little calipers,
Yeah, no, I do know. I've been to that museum.
Like cut to slow motion, the opera music plays in the background, and then the dry ice shatters on the ground.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. But tell me a little bit more, like what I mean. You have to realize, like for people just hearing about you now, you sound like a strange mad scientist making
That's fine.
things with sand, and you're working on another project where people turn lights on just by touching them, right?
By touching each other.
Sorry. So, like, what was your path to going from, making, I guess, what you would call more traditional computer games to wanting to explore sand and people and light and all sorts of other untapped frontiers?
So I've always been interested in hardware stuff, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So 6 or 7 years ago, I started my first hackerspace, which is a place where people get together to do a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, play with microcontrollers and micro PCs and 3D printers and all sorts of other stuff. And then I started another one like 3 or 4 years ago too, another hackerspace. So I've always really been interested in being around people who are drawn to that stuff. And I've also always been interested in games, but I don't, the two interests at some point or another converged, and I decided that I wanted to make things that people. I'm trying to take my time so I'm saying this correctly. I appreciate having the. Let me put it this way. So when indie games first became popular, they became popular because the tools to create games became more democratic, essentially, right? Developers had more access to more tools and the hardware to run those tools on than they had ever had before, and because of that, more people were able to express themselves, and more people consuming games were able to find games that spoke to them, because the market was bigger now. There are more games out there with more diverse viewpoints. And I think of hardware hacking for games as the same thing, which is to say that like you were saying before, the canvas that you use to paint your games on has been the same.
That's your quote. Don't attribute that to me.
It's David Wolinsky, 2015.
Have a great summer. Sometimes in people's yearbooks I write about, don't forget, the canvas dictates what your art is. Yeah. And sometimes I just go, hags.
Call me at not my phone number.
Yep.
Our friendship was a fraud this whole year.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Well, please continue.
Oh no. So let me try to get back to where. Let's see. So the canvas that we use, the way we express ourselves through this medium has been largely dominated by pretty much the same interfaces, which, like we were talking about before, again, is the controller to the console to the TV, right? Even computers or the Oculus Rift. By computers, I mean PC games. It's all very similar. But what you see now is, again, democratization is almost a cheap word to use because it gets thrown around too much. But there's a flattening you see of the access to hardware to create game interfaces on. And so you can buy like a $30 Arduino or a $35 Raspberry Pi or whatever and make your own game platform. And so, it hasn't quite reached the point yet where the hardware is strong enough to do everything we want to do. But I think there's a future potential there very soon to see the same kind of opening up of expression that we did with indie developers getting access to tools. We'll see that now with all developers getting access to the hardware tools that they need to create game stuff, right? And what that means is that, again, we'll, as with everything in human history, the opening up of possibilities is always something that we're attracted to, and that's something that I'm attracted to, is what new ways can we explore, experiences or games that hardware enables. I don't know if that was a rambling thing, but
no, it was good. I mean, but you were saying too that like this is kind of a thing unique to games, which is that like you had said, this is another quote from you, but before a game developer even begins to make their game, considerations that a company has devised already limit their avenues for expression. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about like why is that unique just to games?
Well, it's unique to games because if you want to make a video game that does well commercially, that is disseminated in a mass format, right? So, by the populace, at least currently, it has to be done through the medium that's offered to you by certain hardware, not hardware, certain companies, right? And that's not to say that the companies are bad. It's just to say that, like, if I want to develop an art installation, my only limitation is space and the resources I have available. It's not,
right.
I mean space in like the physical sense, right? And if you want to design a game that's mass consumed, it has to work through these constructs of, we have these buttons available to us. and we have this much space and this much RAM and this much CPU available to us, and these are the displays that our game is going to be consumed on, and so we need our graphics to fit these aspect ratios and blah blah blah, right?
So I assume the audience for these types of hardware experimental, for lack of a better term, games. Does it tend to just be who is the audience for these types of games right now? Because obviously they're not mainstream.
That's it. So there, I have worked on contracts before with companies that have been interested in AR games, and that's more from a sense of novelty, right? So devising badges. I worked on I designed the game for and the UI for a game with Hackerspace that I started called Workshop 88. We'd been contracted by this company called MapR to develop conference badges that in some way communicated the idea of Internet of Things, which is one of those really shitty buzzwords that you hear all around the place now, and nobody really. It means almost nothing because everybody says it.
I use it as a phrase to refer to sort of the way people dehumanize each other on the internet. Just people are just things now on the internet.
That's great. That's what I call Twitter, the Internet of Things.
I say the internet, but I basically mean Twitter. But yeah,
the Twitter of Things.
The Internet of Twitter.
I'm going to respond to that thing. That thing really.
Oh, the thing there, are you referring to the person or the thing that they said? I don't know. They're just a thing.
It's just like this ephemeral thing that I don't like.
Well, so that's part of why I'm asking about, the audience is the audience for mainstream games or whatever. Typically on this project, I talk to people about entitlement from the video game audience, but when you think of the video game audience as someone who's made games for a long time, someone who's played games, someone who has taught game developers, who does the audience seem to be?
For my stuff?
For anything.
For anything?
Yeah.
That's a really hard... I don't know how to answer that question. That could go on...
It's incredibly broad, right?
Yeah.
It's an intentionally broad question because the answer is just it's anybody.
Well, the audience is different, right? So, for the badges we created, the audience was this company that hired us, and then I made this weird game where instead of enforcing at conferences, you want to enforce people to talk to each other. I created a game where the badges had a plague on it, and anytime anybody got close to each other, they infected another person's badge with their plague. And so the audience there was just this company and these conference goers, right? And they didn't even really engage in the game directly. They were just part of it. And you see that a lot with AR games. There are a lot of passive participants in AR games that don't necessarily have to play all the time or play at all. And so, I don't consider them traditional of the audience of the game audience that most people think of, which is why I have a hard time answering that question, is because the audiences there are different than the audiences you're going to talk about when you talk about your console games or your PC games, and even those two audiences, I oftentimes think they're different from each other.
It gets confusing too because I think in the UK and parts of Europe, video games are still just called computer games. This is true.
Yeah, but fuck them. What do they know?
We won a war.
They just need to get their terminology down, I know.
Yeah, they got to speak English properly like us.
Right. Right, you may know a guy named Lou down the street. They pee in Lou. And I don't, I've never...
Every fortnight.
Every fortnight they pee in a Lou.
Yeah, I see what you did. Well, so okay. So that's interesting. I don't even know if we could compare games that are made on contract. Do you know a lot about or much about other more traditional? Are there even video games that are made on contract? Is that even a thing?
Yeah. Oh God, that's
I feel like that's a thing you would know about.
That's a huge thing, right? There are a lot of studios in Chicago that survive and thrive off of, either being contracted out to work on a part of a game, or coming in when a game is in crunch and needs to get done on time,
right?
And firefighting and helping them finish it. So contracting, that's all around. There are big companies that dedicate themselves just to contracting out to other video game companies to help them finish stuff.
Oh no, I know. I mean, I meant more analogous to the badge thing you did, where I don't think maybe.
Oh, is anybody else contracting out for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I don't know.
Probably. I would imagine I'm not it would be kind of weird to be the only person. I know there's this guy up in Wisconsin called Ben Heck, and he doesn't necessarily contract out to other companies that I know of, but he creates custom hardware that he sells. So he creates custom, whether it's like a mashup where it's like, it's a PlayStation 3 with an Xbox, blah, and it's in the same box now. Or, creates weird controllers. Or there's this guy, Caleb Kraft, who's one of the editors at Make Magazine, who works on custom controllers to help disabled people play video games, right? Because, traditional controllers don't really cater to people who are hampered from using them, who are disabled in such a way that they can't use them. And so he creates stuff so that they can play video games. And I think that's really cool and inspiring. And there's also a market out there for it. I
was talking to someone yesterday out in Denmark who was telling me about it sounds maybe silly to say, and it's not meant to be disrespectful, but think of the market of video games for blind people, because they would love to play games too.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating. That's a really fascinating, right? Because it's the reason they're not being created is because there's very little money to be made in that outside of like a niche market, right? So you see, there are games out there for people of disability, I'm sure, but that's an asshole thing to say for some reason. It sounds like there are games. Anyways,
we can trim some of this stuff.
That's cool, but the thing I'm trying to get at is that there's in a mass consumed produced game, you're not going to see, they may cater to colorblind people, but there's probably there's very little consideration for people who don't consume media in the way that the medium, as we consider it, demands.
Yeah. So when you were making more traditional video games, did you feel like you were part of the game industry?
Yeah, probably. I ran the IGDA Chicago for a while. Mm-hmm. So I probably thought I would imagine I felt like I was part of the industry. I never felt, sure.
Well, I asked too, just because part of the reason I'm doing this is try to get a sense of the way other people see the industry. And I've talked to some people who have worked at a big company for 8 years in QA or something else, and they're just like, I never even feel like I was part of the industry. And then I talk to other people who, make just games on their own, and they say sort of the same thing. So, I guess I asked, if you have felt like you were part of the industry, what seems strange to you about the way the game industry works? And I know that you're a guy who has experience in other industries and has a lot of other skills. So what seems weird and unique to the game industry to you?
Well, maybe I should just talk this through, and there's going to be bullshit that comes out of my mouth, and then maybe something good comes out of it. Yeah.
I've been doing that for months now, so that's fine. Yep.
So, there is, in many ways, in a good way, it feels less of an emphasis on professionalism, meaning, I don't know, there's just this certain, when you work in in the regular everyday corporate world, you're expected to wear certain clothes and behave in a certain way and talk with people in a certain manner. And, there's, I don't want to say a collegiality about it, but, maybe that's the right word. And in video games, everything just seems a little bit more loose, right? And that's probably because it's just as much an art form as it is a technical, artists are making some sweeping statements that I'm not so happy with myself about. It just seems it's a little more loose, and that can be a good thing in many ways. It allows a freer, that's what I'm trying to get. It allows a freer exchange of ideas and people to be creative. And it can be bad in some ways as well, in that you can see the worst sides of people sometimes. And that's not always who they are, maybe, but you see the the girls up dancing on stage at GDC kind of stuff, where it's like, maybe we're better than that.
I mean, you're referring to a specific thing that did. What? I'm not going to push you to talk about that, but I am curious. Like, do you feel like much has changed in the couple of years since one such incident?
Well, that happens all the time, right? That's not something. Yeah. That is not isolated to any one time or place. That happens often
in the industry.
Yeah, I often enough, right, that it's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe other people think that's interesting or cool, or I don't know.
Whose idea is it, you think?
I don't know, man. I'm not like a fucking Presbyterian or anything, so it's not like naked bodies dancing around or half naked bodies dancing around grosses me out or anything. I just prefer not to I don't know, I prefer to get down to fucking work rather than having these sideshow circuses off to the side at any event. I don't know. I think it's just part of the loosey-goosey, we're all artists and it's all in good fun kind of crowd.
I mean, I remember, I think, like, a couple of years, a while back, like in the early aughts, E3 tried to do like a more staid, much more professional, no big bombast sort of show. I mean, because the function of E3 is to be, to meet with retailers, the games media and other enthusiasts they're sort of there too to help, market stuff as well. Yeah. And obviously, players get enthused about what's coming out. But the main function of it is like, just to sell units to stores.
Yeah.
But the people around the industry are just like, oh, why are we even going to bother having a conference if we're not going to have it be a big show? And so then they just went back. And so I don't know if that's like a lack of professionalism or if it speaks to some sort of like bigger insecurity or what.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it enough to really figure out where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's never appealed to me. It's always, I don't know. It's like, to me, it's almost like Fall of Rome kind of stuff, right? It's the games industry and the debauched state that is the darker side of it, and it never appealed to me, and I don't think it's. I don't know. I don't think it's cool. No,
I know. I mean, it doesn't shock me to hear it, but, along those lines, I don't necessarily, like, there isn't really figuring out, like, where did this stuff come from, but, one person has one theory and then a bunch of people sort of paint a picture.
Yeah.
And, I am curious to hear, well, especially as someone I've worked with, just some of the entitlement from the audience, which you can interpret however you want. I mean, some of that does, of course, refer to Gamergate stuff, but, I mean, do you remember people behaving in comparable manners growing up in the 80s around video games in the 90s?
Well, I wasn't really on the internet then.
Well,
I mean,
that's why I said comparable.
Well, yeah, but the internet is largely, this isn't stuff that's happening on television or, in your Midwestern family's living room. It's happening on. This is a unique phenomenon to the internet, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so I couldn't imagine anything comparable, but I think it's mostly because the medium that enables these kinds of shenanigans wasn't available then either. And would it have been the same then? In the 90s or whatever, if it had been available, maybe. I have no idea. But as far as the entitlement, I don't know. Like, what do you mean by what does that mean?
By entitlement? Yeah, I mean, people being very angry about video games, people being angry about the wrong people making the wrong types of games, people being angry about free DLC not doing the right thing. It's just a lot of very, strong senses of what is right over a consumer product that you may not see so much in other mediums, but there does seem to be something really potent about it around video games.
So there's this quote by in a Wilco song where they say, and if the whole world's singing your songs and all your paintings have been hung, just remember what was yours is everyone's from now on. Like the idea that once you create something and it goes out there, it's not yours anymore. And it's up to other people then to say whatever they want about it. And I'm okay with that. I think people can be dicks about it, and that that's frustrating always. But you kind of have to just, when you release something and people interpret it in a certain way or get mad about it in a certain way. Maybe that's not a controversial thing to say, but I think maybe it is in some ways, because I think developers should just, kind of fucking get over it and unless there are obvious, the hate mail that they receive, the death threats and so forth, that's unnecessary. But people's opinions in and of themselves aren't a terrible thing. They just are passionate about the thing that they love.